All right, what's up everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, aka Mr. Delks Moses, aka Mr. Anoints himself with grease, governed by caprice. I'll never get tired of saying that. Anoints himself with grease, governed by caprice. Today is April 12th, 2025. It's about 9:15 p.m. where I'm at right now. Coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. We are continuing our reading of Neil MacMaster's powerful book that you can see on screen, Racism in Europe from 1870 to the year 2000. This is a book that came out in 2009, and for the past week and a half or so, we've been reading this book slowly, section by section, page by page, chapter by chapter, for our 10th book in our Book to React series, where we read a book cover to cover and react to the words that are on screen. It's very simple. It's a simple concept. And so this book I've been enjoying a lot. It's very informative, very dense, but written in a very readable style. So I suggest this book to everybody to put it into your collection, buy the physical copy, which you can get on Amazon for the humble price of only $22.52 or $66 in hardcover fashion. And in this section for today, we're going to be reading a bit about anti-Semitism. This book is mostly about anti-blackness in Europe and the history of anti-Semitism in Europe, which are two very understudied things. And so that's why this book is important. Now, before we do that, we're going to be jumping into the comments section, because at the beginning of every Book to React series, we will always read the comments for any other comment put under a Book to React video. And I have two here that I want to read that I think are very interesting to get into, and these are the only two under a Book to React video since our last one. So the first one here comes from BTTZ Fan F5159, and he says, Europe is not a country. I don't think I've ever said that Europe is a country, unlike how a lot of people say Africa is a country. I never said that. So it's impossible to put all of Europe in one. Did we do that? No, but the book is an expansive history of Europe. I'm pretty sure BTZ Fan, whatever stupid name he has, wouldn't say something this stupid if we were just reading the history of Europe. By the way, Kamal jumped into the live stream. He gave a pound sign. Shout out to Kamal. Pound to you, brother. So yeah, if this was a book about general European history, a 500-page tome written by some other white man generally covering the history of Europe, BTZ Fan wouldn't be saying, you know, it's impossible to put all of Europe in one. Neil MacMaster doesn't do that, and I don't do that. This book is explicitly covering a phenomenon of anti-blackness and anti-Semitism in many different European countries across space and time. So why would you come in here and say this unless you are anti-black? BTTZ Fan is a racist white man. This is a racist white man. Don't ever let it get confused whenever you see comments like this and this person says, hey, I'm just here stating facts, or hey, I'm just stating my opinion. Your opinion is racist. Because there's no reason to come in here and say something like this when that is not the point at all. Let's continue with his stupid comment. He says, people remember always to not generalize Asia and Africa, but they generalize Europe. What a dumbass comment. What a stupid, ignorant, racist-ass comment. Nobody is generalizing all of Europe. We are studying the history here. And I'm stuttering because this comment is so fucking stupid. Who could say something like this? The book is literally titled Racism in Europe, covering anti-blackness and anti-Semitism across many different European countries. Nobody is generalizing. It's the study of a phenomenon. Dumbass. All right, continuing here to this other comment I got here. This is from a black person. His name is Tyrone Stevenson, 3853. Just by reading the name now, I doubt this is a black person, because I don't think there are any black people actually named Tyrone anymore. All those niggas died in the 80s or got locked up in the 90s. Facts. There ain't no Tyrones running around. Now, the young hoes naming them sons DeQuavius, Demetrius, Daquan, shit like that. Ain't no young hoes naming their sons Tyrone. So I don't believe this is a black person at all. And there's a lot of white folks online blackfishing, which is why I always show my face, which is why I always come out here, show this beautiful melanin on my body to let y'all know that this is real. But anyway, he says, put the foundational on that black American like you got some sense. LOL, unless you're not. Now, I know this person is trying to, be supportive and trying to say right on, brother, and saying, because at the beginning of all my videos, I always say I'm a black American from Louisiana. But I don't really use the FBA title. I could identify as foundational Black American if I want, but I view myself as part of the original family. Who is the original man? The original man is the Asiatic Black man, the maker, the owner, the cream of the planet Earth, father of civilization, God of the universe. I don't do that online gang banging, all that online set tripping about who's a tether, who's FBA, who's ADOS. I don't do any of that. You get what I'm saying? I am that, but I'm not going to be a part of that, if that makes sense. So those are the only 2 comments we got under the Book to React series. So if you have any more comments that you want me to react to, put it in the live stream chat as we're reading this book, or put it under this video or any of the other ones in the Book to React series, and I promise we will read it. Now, continuing on here, we're starting a new section. I believe this is chapter 5, and this is part 1 of chapter 5, and we're studying the rise of the Nazi movement and doing a deeper study into the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe. Let's go. So, as was shown in part 1, the decades before 1914 saw the spread of social Darwinism and eugenics, as well as the deepening of new racialized forms of anti-Semitism. Eugenics, as the science of improving the biological well-being of the national stock, was not necessarily overtly racist. Many of its exponents were Jews or socialists, social democrats, and liberals. However, the core of Nazi ideology, which emerged from the chaos and slaughter of the First World War, represented a pulling together of the 2 strands of eugenics and anti-Semitism into an extremely potent and dangerous concoction. The distinctive feature of this period, from the late phase of the First World War through the Weimar Republic, 1919 to 1933, and down to the coming to power of Adolf Hitler in January 1933, is less the originality of racist ideas. There was little that had not already been said before 1914. There were so many racist ideas, it was hard to come up with new ones, is what he meant to say. But rather a profound political, social, and moral crisis that enabled such virulent forms of anti-Semitism to spread within society and finally to receive a concrete expression in the Nazi racial state, 1933 to 1945. Before examining Hitler's anti-Semitism, a few brief comments about this background of military collapse and crisis, the general context in which Nazism began to thrive. Apart from a few exceptions, like the controversial thesis of Daniel Goldenhagen in Hitler's Willing Executioners, most contemporary historians agree that the key to the crisis in German society that culminated in the Nazi dictatorship and the Holocaust can be located in the events of the First World War. Firstly, it appeared to many Germans, Hitler included, that the defeat of 1918 had not come about by military means. The heroic and revered army had, it was claimed, stood firm, but because of the infamous stab in the back, the treasonous subversion of the Reich by a combination of worker strikes, Bolshevik-inspired revolution, liberal defeatism, and an international Jewish conspiracy. It was much more convenient for the military high command, as well as a wider public, to search for scapegoats than to analyze the deeper causes of crisis within the failings of the traditional authoritarian system or to accept any degree of responsibility. So basically what he's saying here, we should know this by now, but basically, Hitler's rise to power was predicated upon this conspiracy theory that a lot of right-wing people who were in the military and also supportive of the German regime that went to war in World War I, they said that we could have won the war, and we were winning the war, but the communists, the liberals, the socialists, who were mostly Jews, were a part of our downfall. And it echoes a lot about, what the rhetoric is coming from the right wing in America right now, when they say that America used to be great until, the foreigners started flooding the borders and jobs started going overseas by these globalist Jews, etc. So the more things change, the more they stay the same to some degree. And this sort of rhetoric is very popular among people even still today. Blaming the otherizing people and blaming the mistakes of the state upon a conspiracy of a few individuals who hide in the shadows. Let's continue here. So, the bitter and sour feeling of unwarranted defeat added to the humiliation of the terms imposed by the Allies through the Versailles Treaty. Germany lost 13% of her territory, all her colonies, 9/10 of her merchant fleet, and faced enormous reparation costs and reduction of the armed forces to 100,000 men. The enormous economic cost of the first total war had severely damaged infrastructures, lowered the standard of living, and indirectly led to the hyperinflation hyperinflation of 1922 to 1923 that created a general panic and wiped out savings. Large sections on both the political right and the left mobilized the Civil War, organized illegal proto-fascist paramilitary units of communist workers' councils, and showed a contempt for parliamentary democracy, which undermined the legitimacy of the infant Weimar government, a republic without Republicans. Powerful conservative forces, including the army, command, and industrialists, fearing a revolution from below, were willing to give support and financial backing to extreme right-wing or proto-fascist movements like the Fatherland Party, the fascist Schutz and Trutzbund, the Free Corps, and the German Workers' Party that resorted widely to violence. So the fear of communism basically led them down the road to fascism. Among the millions of demobilized soldiers, many of whom returned to unemployment and the soup queue, was a particular kind of ex-serviceman who provided a ready source of recruitment for fascist paramilitaries. It has been argued that many of these men had been traumatized by the appalling conditions of modern trench warfare and inured to the dehumanizing conditions under which hundreds of thousands were reduced to mere objects of flesh. Life became cheap, the normal sensibilities to pain and suffering numbed, and the brutalized Free Corps units organized to crush the Spartacist revolution or the brown shirt thugs of the Nazi Party injected into peacetime society extraordinary levels of casual violence. The fascist ex-servicemen were, above all, inspired by a virulent form of nationalism and conditioned by years of militarization, which emphasized the importance of individual and heroic self-sacrifice on behalf of the higher value of the German Volk. The so-called Volksgemeinschaft, or national community, was imbued with an extraordinary emotional weight, a feeling that can only be described as quasi-religious in intensity. The disorientation and trauma that accompanied the collapse of the Reich found widespread expression in a sense of impending doom, of an apocalyptic vision of a terminal world crisis in which the German people were threatened with extinction, a distinctly paranoid view of an international Judeo-Bolshevik conspiracy, a Marxist-inspired race war intent on the destruction of the superior Aryan, was not only the pathological expression of a few mentally disturbed individuals, but was shared extensively across the right, from aristocratic conservatives in the high command like General Ludendorff to the rank-and-file fascists like the unknown army propagandist Adolf Hitler. So basically what they're saying is like, a lot of the brothers, not even my brothers, but you know what I mean, a lot of the men were coming home from World War I and they saw that, their friends, their comrades in arms were killed en masse, thousands of them. Life had become so cheap. They come back to a country that had been humiliated and defeated in war. And they're readily able and easily susceptible to fall to the propaganda that their country was somehow stolen from them. So I can imagine a situation like, for example, let's say in Iraq, right? Thousands of servicemen come back home. Let's say Iraq was bigger, because when we think about the Iraq War, not that many servicemen actually died. I believe it was only like 3,000 or 4,000 people died in the Iraq War. For anybody that knows more, please let me know. But imagine like guys come back from Iraq and then after that, somehow America disintegrates. Like the country falls apart, it's defeated, it's no longer the top country in the world. And so yeah, these people that just risk their lives to fight for America come back to a country that is, poorer, destabilized, humiliated in front of the world. And so they're readily able to fall to this propaganda that says, hey, you're not the one to blame, or the country's not the one to blame. It was some evil entity like Jews or globalists who made America fall apart. So that's essentially what happened like after World War I in Germany, which led to the rise of the Nationalist Socialist Party, aka the Nazis. Continuing here. So racism in Hitler's Mein Kampf. One of the clearest documentary sources of the radical and potentially exterminationist anti-Semitism that emerged in 1918 and 1923 can be found in Mein Kampf, dictated in prison during 1924. This text is not examined here because of the later importance of the Führer and its seminal role in the elaboration of the Holocaust, but precisely to the extent that it is a representative text, a fairly mediocre and typical expression of the paranoid prejudices of the little man, the street-fighting toughs of the Free Corps, and the other ex-soldier paramilitary organizations that Pollulated after 1918. Every time we see a word we don't know, we're going to look it up. Pollulated. Pollulated? Never seen that word before. Pollulate. Definition. I don't have anybody here in the chat with me right now, so I'm going to have somebody, got to look it up myself. But if you want to be the dictionary man or lady, just let me know, and we'll put that in there for you. What does pollulate mean? That's a new word. All right, pollulate. Okay, it's a verb that means to multiply or spread politically or rapidly. Prolifically or rapidly. The countless rats that pullulate in the mind. Okay, so where were we? Yeah, so basically all these sort of street thugs, paramilitary people reproduced rapidly after the end of World War I in Germany. The memoir is particularly revealing of the way in which the scientific and political anti-Semitism of elites, relayed through newspapers, books, and pamphlets, was picked up by the petite bourgeoisie, or working class activists, and reconfigured into a crude populist blend. Hitler, through his years of unemployment in the workers' hostels of Vienna, 1906 to 1919, in Munich, and as a corporal during the First World War, had his roots in a lower class milieu, while at the same time he had the education and petite bourgeoisie origins that enabled him to read and absorb current racist texts, and to recast them into a simplified but powerful form. Mein Kampf provides a classic example of the way in which modern racist ideas, elaborated by intellectual elites, were diffused generally within society by an intermediary tier of opinion formers, what Gramsci would term organic intellectuals, from school teachers and priests to trade unionists, journalists, barkeepers, police officers, and minor officials. Very little of what Hitler has to say, is in any way original. Rather, he presents a potpourri of the eugenic and social Darwinist thinking that had become generalized within German society. So Kamal says, question mark here. Explain what you mean by question mark. I don't know what you mean. But I think what Neil MacMaster is trying to say here is that if you read Mein Kampf, it's not Hitler coming down from the mountaintop with stone tablets and that radically influenced people's thinking. People were already anti-Semitic. People were already pretty racist. People already had a lot of negative views in their head about a lot of different people, and also about the direction that their society was going in. So it's like, how Trump wrote his book, which we read on our channel, right? A lot of Trump's ideas weren't exactly his own, other than the tariff stuff. It was stuff that had already been circulating and pollulating, if you will, amongst the right wing for a long time. Trump just synthesized it in a way that allowed it to become broadcast everywhere, and more people were receptive to it. He marketed the ideas that were already, spread out everywhere in society. So that's similar to Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf just takes the ideas that were already, in society, synthesizes them, and puts them out there in a way that's digestible for people. Continuing here. So, although Mein Kampf is an incoherent, repetitious, and bombastic work, it is possible to detect within the verbiage a fairly coherent, if profoundly irrational, set of ideas. Let me know if you think we should read Mein Kampf on this channel. Let me know if you think we should read Mein Kampf on this channel. I wouldn't be scared to do it. I don't know if I could go to Germany afterwards, because I think the book is still banned there. But let me know if you think I should read and react to Mein Kampf on my channel. Anyway, Hitler's thought started from the premise of a hierarchy of races, in which the Aryans, or Germans, occupied the pinnacle, the most advanced human type and the embodiment of superior moral, aesthetic, martial, and cultural values. In line with so much 19th century racial thought, Hitler interpreted the whole of history and contemporary international politics in terms of race conflict. The racial question gives the key not only to world history, but to all human culture. The driving force behind historical change was not class conflict, but rather a perpetual social Darwinian struggle for racial dominance in which the weaker would inevitably go under and the higher type triumph. In this struggle, which for Hitler was redolent with the language of warfare, of martial strength and heroic self-sacrifice, the human spirit found its highest expression and ultimate meaning through the duty of guaranteeing the survival of the race. By fighting to ensure the victory of the highest form, the Aryans, the individual ensured a form of progress beneficial to all mankind, the long-term domination of the most advanced civilization and culture, and the defeat of repulsive subhuman races. There was little here that had not already been elaborated by late 19th century racists. Hitler did not make it clear why it was the Jews, why it was that the Jews should wish either to enslave the Aryans or to exterminate them, except that they were driven by a diabolic and destructive intent, a secular version of the age-old Christian and anti-Semitism that regarded the Jews as engaged in an evil conspiracy to subvert and destroy Christian society. Acti says, no, Mein Kampf, because why would you? I think most people with common sense know it's intensely problematic and that doesn't need to be proved. But hey, it's your choice. Well, shout out to Acti for, her commentary right there. I just got to say this, I don't want people to think that I only want to read things that agree with me. So Acti, I think it would be good to read Mein Kampf because I want to prove to people that I have an open mind. I'm all about absorbing and processing information and challenging the ideas front and center, which is why I read the comments from the white supremacists that jump into my comment section. They don't get to stay up, but I read them. I get to hear how stupid and incoherent the thoughts are of the white supremacists. So I don't want people to think Simon just only wants to read books about racism. No, I don't just want to read books about racism or anti-blackness. Let's actually read the words of the racists and the anti-black actors out there, the anti-Semites, the white supremacists themselves. I think it would be good. I'm not against reading the text of the white supremacists. Every time one of those white supremacists walks into a church, a school, a mosque, and murders, 30 people, I read their manifestos live on Livestream, right? I've read the text of like Field Manual 66 or whatever it was, where the white supremacists are they're already planning to like murder black people should the race war ever go down, as if we're not living in a race war already. So I do think, reading Mein Kampf would be good for the channel and would be good for the audience and would be good just for myself too. Of course, there's nothing in there I'm going to agree with. I know I'm going to be reading something that I vehemently agree with. But I read Trump's book and we were able to laugh at his ideas on page. Why not have a good laugh with Hitler? Why not have a good laugh with Hitler? That's what I'm saying. Anyway, so basically what this text said here is that, Hitler basically didn't give any reason why he hated the Jews. He gave no reason why the Jews supposedly want to eliminate white people. Now, later white supremacists have built on the idea of why Jews want to, why they want to hate white people, right? As if it's not obvious, right? As if the Jews didn't suffer under white supremacy, like coldly, boldly, frankly, right? If your people, I wish the white supremacists had just the capability of imagining what it is to be in other people's shoes. If white people were put in camps by a bunch of, let's say, Romani people or, black people or Native Americans, right? And the Native Americans or black people systematically put white folks in gas chambers and murdered them, their children, their wives, their men, their sons, everything like that. Don't you think maybe the white folks would say, hey, we want to stand against black supremacy or Native American supremacy or gypsy supremacy? Don't you think, the whites would be like that if that did happen in your history? So of course the Jews are anti-white supremacists. So later white supremacists have built on the idea that the Jews want to get rid of white folks because, they don't want to ever suffer from white supremacy again. So to some degree, real white supremacists acknowledge that the Holocaust did happen and that other oppressive actions against Jews did happen. Okay, I hope y'all are following me here. Real white supremacists don't do that sort of like, the Holocaust didn't really happen. If they do, they're just obfuscating the fact. Because it doesn't make sense logically to say that Jews want to get rid of white people for no other reason than just they hate white folks, okay? That a stupid white supremacist thinks that. The smart white supremacists acknowledge that Jews hate white people because of the Holocaust and other things that have happened. Therefore, that's why the Jews secretly try to work with black folks to help them, migrate to Europe. The Jews secretly want to open the borders to allow immigrants to flood into America. The Jews secretly want to undermine Christianity and want to have secular societies. It's because for their own protection. That's how the white supremacists, the true, honest white supremacists acknowledge it. But Hitler doesn't really do that, according to Neil MacMaster in his book, Mein Kampf. Going here to Acti says, I think it would be better to read a book of current white supremacists if that's your goal. Yeah, like Trump's book, LOL. Okay. All right, shout out to Acti. I mean, there are current books written by the white supremacists because they're still pumping out propaganda in publications. So there is stuff to read. But why not read the classics? Why not read the classics? Why not read where all of them derive from it from? You know what I mean? Why not try to read from, their God, their demigod, if you want to say it like that. Anyway, so at a more social Darwinian level, Hitler also believed that it was a law of nature that any group would be driven to try and assert its own dominance in the struggle for survival with other races. The evil and depravity of the Jews did not lie in their religion, but rather in their physical being, in the blood, and as such could never be expunged or modified by education, reform, or any act of will. In this sense, they were inexorably, I can't read today. They were inexorably driven to play out and fulfill their racial fate. The Jews, in attempting to destroy the higher races, deployed a number of strategies, of which the three chief modes were international capitalism, revolutionary Marxism, and biological race war. A central ingredient in the political anti-Semitism, elaborated after the mid-19th century, was a belief in an international conspiracy of Jewish capitalists to exploit and enslave the national working class, as well as to undermine or destabilize national economies through their control of stock markets, banks, and other financial institutions. One of the most sinister ways in which subversion and weakening of the nation and Volk was achieved was through the deliberate formation of war, so that healthy states would be thrown against each other in mutual destruction, while the Jews amassed huge profits from armaments sold to both sides. During the First World War, the Jews had come under attack as shirkers and speculators, a treacherous fifth column, and Hitler echoed this in his claim that German war production had fallen almost entirely under Jewish financial control. British anti-German foreign policy that culminated in the First World War was controlled not by the government or national interests, but by Jewish finance, which desires not only the complete economic annihilation of Germany, but also her complete political enslavement. Now, this is going to sound crazy, but Hitler is not wrong. I know I said earlier right now, there's nothing in Mein Kampf that I'll agree with. But Hitler is not wrong, not in the sense that the Jews want to arm both sides, but of course the capitalist class, the owners of production, the people that make guns, make bombs, are very happy when war happens. Let's keep it absolutely real. Let's keep it absolutely real. The capitalist class would prefer war not to happen because they're okay with, international trade, goods moving back and forth, cheap labor moving across borders, all that sort of stuff. But they're also very happy when they can turn their car factory into a bomb factory, when they can turn their wagon making factory into a bullet production line. So Hitler is not technically wrong. But this is when not having a critique of capitalism or being dishonest in your critique about capitalism and blaming it on a specific group can go astray. To some degree, the right wing in America and many other parts of the world are not wrong in their critique of the system. But the problem is their critique of the system doesn't include the billionaires at top, or the capitalists, the owners of the factories, the people with money and influence in a society. I'm pretty sure, and I'm going to give Hitler some credit here, I'm going to sound like Kanye West. I'm sounding a bit like Kanye West here, but I'm going to say this. I'm pretty sure Hitler was a above average man in intelligence. I'm pretty sure Hitler had some understanding of a capitalist critique from the Marxian point of view. I'm pretty sure Hitler could understand the basic ideas of the dialectic, the proletariat, and a class struggle between the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, and the proletariat. Hitler probably understood this and just said, let me just tell people, instead of it being against the lower classes, against the rich people, it's essentially Jews against everybody. Because the majority of the rich people, or at least the people in Western Europe who were, not even the majority, but overrepresented in finance and industry, were Jews. So let me just blame them, because that's easier to sell. Plus, I really don't like communism, as Hitler was thinking. So that's what I'm going to say. That's my take on that. And y'all take with that what you will. I'm not bigging up Hitler, but I'm just saying that's not exactly a wrong critique to have. All right? And debate me if you like. All right, the second threat offered by the Jews arose in the form of Marxist communism. Hitler saw in the Russian Revolution and the ambition of the Comintern to spread revolution on a global scale, a deliberate conspiracy of Jews mobilizing the power of barbaric Asian or racially inferior Slav hordes gathered in the East to crush Germany. For him, as for many other anti-Semites, the proof of this could be found in the dominant role of Jews in the Bolshevik Party and in revolutionary movements in general. Let's just stop right here. Let's just stop right here. What is the reason? What is the reason that there were many Jews joining the Bolshevik Party or any other communist or left-wing party? Do you think it's because Jews somehow, being the owners of capitalism and the factories and the rich people in society, secretly also wanted to overturn that society and get rid of all of it? If they were benefiting the most from it, why do you think the Jews would join the Communist Party? It's not because of that. It's because of the simple fact that the Communist Party and the leftist parties in general were the ones saying, hey guys, let's stop oppressing the Jews. That's it. That's it. But the white supremacists like Hitler would say, the Jews want to destabilize society and bring their godless communism because secretly they hate us and they hate our Lord Jesus Christ, who was also a Jew. Make it make sense. Nothing makes sense in the white supremacist worldview, which is why I think it's very important we read Mein Kampf again. Anyway, I'm going to continue here. So, Karl Marx was a prophet who recognized in the morass of a slowly decomposing world the most essential poisons and concentrated them for the swifter annihilation of the independent existence of free nations on this earth. And all this in the service of his race. Oh, Hitler got bars. Those are Hitler bars. Okay. Basically what he's trying to say is that Karl Marx was trying to destroy nationhood and bring international communism for the sake of taking away freedom from the white man and bringing forth glory for his race, meaning Karl Marx was a Jew. Okay. Anyway, it was the communist organization of strikes and revolutionary movements of 1917 and 1918 that had weakened Germany internally and led to the military defeat of 1918. The contradiction between Jews as both the masters of capitalism as well as revolutionaries bent on the destruction of German capitalism was resolved by Hitler through a distinction between subversive Jewish international capital and the German national economy, which was to be protected in its economic independence and freedom. That don't make no damn sense. I don't even have anything to say. That don't make no damn sense. All right. However, the fundamental and most terrifying threat for Hitler, and the one that subsumed even the dangers of finance capitalism and Marxist revolution, was that presented to Aryan racial purity and strength, all really significant symptoms of decay, can in the last analysis be reduced to racial causes. The most devastating of all Jewish strategies was the attempt to destroy the racial substance of the German Volk. In line with contemporary eugenics science and race biology, Hitler emphasized two ways in which the destruction of the Aryan race was being engineered. Firstly, the Jews encouraged all forms of hereditary disease and decay that undermined and enfeebled the national stock. From alcoholism and tuberculosis to birth control, abortion, the moral corruption of youth, and the spread of venereal disease. Hitler, like many anti-Semites in an age when a profound fear of syphilis constituted a dark personal obsession, claimed that the Jews were the key organizers of international white slavery and prostitution. What? 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 Venereal disease, a terrible poisoning of the national body, a mass contamination, resulted in hereditary degeneration, insanity, and sterility. Birth control and family restriction was a Jewification of our spiritual life and mammonization of our mating instinct, which will sooner or later destroy our entire offspring. Mammonization. Mammonization. I need to know what this means. Mammonization. Mammonization. This is a new word. We're going to look that up. Okay, the process of rendering something mammonish. Okay, but what is mammonish? Okay. All right, I need to look this word up, and it's hard for me to find. Hold on, wait. All right. Okay. Mammon and his slave. Okay, all I see is this really creepy picture. All I'm seeing here is this really creepy picture here. That's a hella creepy picture. Imagine that. Imagine you meet a girl on Tinder and you come home and she has that on her wall. Okay. Mammonish. What is mammonish? Mammonish. Regarded as a source of evil and corruption, of riches or wealth. The word of mammonish is derived from mammon. Okay. Marked by avarice or greed. Okay, so mammonish. This sounds like a very racist word, by the way. Who is mammon? What is mammon? I'm in Merriam-Webster. Okay. Reject all. Mammonish. Actuated or prompted by a devotion to money or the service of mammon. Okay. Mammon. A material wealth or possession, especially as having a debasing influence. Okay. I guess mammon might be in the Bible. And mammon is the god of wealth and greed. Maybe he's like something you would find. Okay, it comes from the Bible, yeah. And it says here in the Bible, right here, it says in the Bible, Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. It says, all right, you cannot serve God and mammon. Okay, you cannot serve God and mammon. I guess mammon is also the god of money, right? So, all right. Anyway, Hitler was trying to say that the Jews were trying to mammonize, make the people worship money and wealth in Germany instead of their natural ways, their natural Aryan ways. Okay, so Hitler's rambling text was peppered with biological metaphors that presented the Jew as a physical embodiment of him invites him. The most terrifying prospect of all for Hitler was, however, the prospect of racial mixing and an irreversible degeneration. At the core of Hitler's obsessive racism was the idea, a central concept in the modern racial theory, that developed from the mid-19th century onwards, that the hybrid offspring of parents from a high and a low race would be a medium between the level of the two parents. Interracial offspring would always constitute a weaker and inferior type, and if the process of mixing was too extensive, it would eventually irredeemably damage the master race. I wish Hitler went to Brazil. I wish Hitler went to Brazil. I wish Hitler went to Brazil. Because saying that the interracial offspring would somehow be lesser than the two, boy, you ain't never seen no big booty Brazilians. Boy, I wish pornography and videotapes existed at the time, because one of my favorite tapes is Booty Talk number, God knows what, maybe Booty Talk number 45 or whatever. I believe it was Nat Turner or Mandingo, one of them boys, went down to Brazil and was smashing the biggest booties in Brazilian history. My God, Hitler should have went to Brazil. I think Hitler went to Argentina, so if Argentina has Hitler, he probably has a very fine, big booty, light-skinned, curly-haired, green-eyed wife right now. Facts. Hitler went to Brazil and he got them cheeks. And I'm pretty sure he swore off all his racist ways. Probably died diving into something exotic. Hitler probably died diving into something exotic. Because what are you saying, my guy? Have you not been to the Bay? Have you not been to Southern California, baby? I'm sorry. I went off on a tangent. So, okay. Ackley says time for me to leave. I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm sorry. But anyway, the exhortation against miscegenation carried all the teleological weight of the ultimate commandment. Ackley says somehow the topic is booties again. I apologize. This is Booked React. This is where nobody is supposed to come on live stream and nobody's supposed to care. I'm sorry. But anyway, I'll continue here. So, interracial offspring would always constitute a weaker and inferior type, and if the process of mixing was too extensive, it would eventually irredeemably damage the master race. The exhortation against miscegenation carried all the teleological weight of the ultimate commandment. Blood, sin, and desecration of the race are the original or the original sin in this world, and the end of humanity which surrenders to it, the stronger must dominate and not blend with the weaker, thus sacrificing his own greatness and peoples who bastardize themselves, sin against the will of eternal providence. Such passages in Mein Kampf echo the best-selling novel of Arthur Dinter, later Nazi Gottlieb, or Thuringia, The Sin Against the Blood, 1917, which adopted the stock breeding theory of telegony, according to which one bad crossing was sufficient to damage all subsequent offspring. In the novel, a German woman, seduced by a Jewish army officer, was racially polluted so that even her child from a later marriage to the Aryan hero continued to show Semitic traits. The diabolic plot to undermine the German race was, in Hitler's view, achieved in two ways. Firstly, Jewish marriage regulations tolerated a partnership between women and Christian males, a systematic policy deployed to poison the blood, while Jewish males practiced the severest segregation, thus retaining racial purity and strength. Secondly, the Jews deliberately encouraged miscegenation between Aryans and the lowest forms of racial life, as with post-war deployment of French black troops into the Rhineland. Okay, so this is the theory that the white supremacists still hold on to today, that the Jews basically want to send, black men, Asian men, Indian men, whatever type of men into European nations or into white nations in the Americas like the USA or Canada to weaken the blood of white men, all right? So that's essentially what they're trying to say. All right. Hitler, following contemporary racial science, believed that such racial pollution of Aryan stock could not be reversed or bred out from future generations. Since such miscegenation had been going on since the 30 Years' War, the terminal collapse of the Aryan race was perilously close. Indeed, the defeat in the First World War was ultimately due to such biological deterioration. However, in a desperate race against time, it was still possible to reverse the process of degeneration since the nation still possessed great unmixed stock. What was required was a eugenic race breeding program, which would identify the pure Germans and ensure the proliferation of Aryan children, while at the same time banning miscegenation and destroying the reproductive capacity of the Jews. In order to justify this racial project, Hitler deployed a pseudoscientific and eugenic discourse, borrowing from the field of race hygiene that was disseminated widely in German culture. He outlined plans for the Volkisch state to deploy the most modern medical means, including sterilization or euthanasia programs aimed at the diseased, crippled, and cretins, racial commissions to certify Aryan marriages, and the scientific breeding of absolutely healthy bodies. Hitler, who showed little understanding of genetic theory, had no hesitation in legitimating totally irrational ideas through a discourse that claimed ultimate scientific validity. In 1942, he told Himmler, "The discovery of the Jewish virus is one of the greatest revolutions that has taken place in the world. The battle in which we are engaged today is of the same sort as the battle waged during the last century by Pasteur and Koch. How many diseases have their origin in the Jewish virus? They're poisoning the blood of our nation." That's a Donald Trump quote. Some historians have noted that the language and symbolism of fascism was closer to that found in religion than rationalism, but a religion founded less on the Judeo-Christian tradition than on the sanctification of nature and the nation. As Mark Neocleus comments, in fascist thought, the laws of nature are simultaneously scientifically verifiable and mystified. The resulting biological mysticism appears to have both the status of science and the power of religion. This was the central message developed and popularized in the early 20th century by Ernst Haeckel and the Monist League. What was strongly conveyed through the language of Mein Kampf was a particular emotional and messianic charge, an apocalyptic feeling that the fate of the human race, or at least of its most sublime forms, was hanging in the balance, and that the resolution would depend on a desperate war with the most cunning and powerful of enemies, the Jew. I find it so interesting that people like Hitler and other white supremacists claim to be the master race, but continually get outsmarted, outwitted, defeated by this small band of people who they claim to be their inferiors. How? How, Sway? How? If you're the master race, how do you keep on getting beat by the Jews? If this is the case, right? And it's just ridiculous. Their whole worldview is ridiculous. Anyway, although the overall combination of ideas in Mein Kampf was unique to Hitler, the key concepts outlined above were not. It should be emphasized the ramblings of a lunatic, but could be found. It's like Kanye tweets. It's like Kanye tweets. So, the key concepts outlined above were not, it should be emphasized, the ramblings of a lunatic, but could be found widely dispersed both within German and European society. Just one example of this widespread and paranoid anti-Semitic vision can be provided by the notorious forgery, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. This text, which was elaborated and diffused by Russian proto-fascists from 1897 to 1898 onwards, found a global distribution after the First World War, was translated into numerous languages, and found widespread acceptance even among European educated elites. This bizarre and delusional text, which outlined a Jewish conspiracy for global domination, including the fomentation of Marxist revolution, found even a degree of acceptance in 1920 by staid organs like the British journals, The Spectator, The Morning Post, and The Times. The protocols I will probably never read, not because it's just been proven to be fake. So I don't understand what would be the point of reading the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Reading Mein Kampf would make sense because there's people that still swear by that book. They take their talking points from that book, are quietly inspired by that book. The Protocols of the Elder of Zion does inspire people, but it's been proven to be fake, so I don't know why people would even pick it up today, right? There's no merit in that type of book. Continuing here. What a radical difference in the case of Hitler was not so much the distinctiveness of his ideas, a populist rehash of contemporary currents, but the entire political complex in Weimar Germany that made it possible for the dictator to seize power in 1933 and to translate such a racial dystopia into the horrific reality of a racial state. An older school of historical writing, particularly prevalent immediately after the Second World War and recently revived by Daniel Goldenhagen, ascribed the Holocaust to a peculiarly German ideology of anti-Semitism that was so deep-rooted in the national character and traditions of the people that the vast majority of the population was prepared to tolerate or engage in genocide. As Goldhagen claims, not economic hardship, not the coercive means of a totalitarian state, not social psychological pressure, not invariable psychological propensities, but ideas about Jews that were pervasive in Germany and had been for decades, induced ordinary Germans to kill unarmed, defenseless Jewish men, women, and children by the thousands, systematically and without pity. Such an emphasis on the unique power of ideas cannot provide an adequate explanation for the Nazi phenomena. If Hitler had not come to power in 1933, historians today rank him alongside numerous other obscure and third-rate street agitators who promoted racial utopias. Significantly, political commentators and Jewish organizations in the period before the First World War were more apprehensive about the potential for state violence and repressive political anti-Semitism in France and Russia than in Germany. So, very interesting text here. Gives me inspiration to read a new book for the Book to React series, and basically a good overview of, the inconsistencies of Mein Kampf and how these ideas were, not original to Hitler. They were already floating around in society. So, let's go here. Eugenics, medical science, and the Nazi racial state. However, this still leaves open the highly charged moral and political issue, one that continues to be central to the debate among historians, of the extent to which the dramatic shift after 1933 towards state-backed racism was supported, tolerated, or opposed by the general population. Two aspects of this immensely complex and contentious issue will be briefly examined: the role of a growing body of experts in the construction of racial praxis, race institutions, research centers, legislation, etc., and the extent of popular anti-Semitism, as measured by government and opposition surveys of public opinion. As current research demonstrates, the grim road to Auschwitz was neither the sole responsibility of the Nazi elite that forced genocide on a terrorized and cowed nation, nor was it the work of an entire people who were actively complicit in mass killing. Rather, the extent of racism in German society was a complex, frequently contradictory phenomenon that cut across class and varied by region and religious affiliation. A growing body of research has uncovered the close relationship between the Nazi implementation of a racial state and an expanding core of race scientists and technocrats who made medical murder and the technical machinery of mass killing possible. By the first decade of the 20th century, the German medical profession was already, through the development of racial hygiene or eugenics, staking out a claim to determine government policy and to resolve major social problems, from crime to economic inefficiency. The huge loss of life during the First World War and alarmist anxieties concerning imminent national and racial collapse provided a further impulse to the status of eugenics and to the power of professionals that offered scientific solutions to a society in crisis. Under Weimar, medical race science was already moving in a dangerous direction. Most symptomatic of a growing body of professional thought was the idea that Christian or liberal traditions had made a pernicious dogma of the sanctity of human life. A powerful authoritarian current maintained that the life of the individual was subservient to that of the racial collective, and that the state thus held the power of life and death over lower or worthless forms of life, from aliens to the hereditarily diseased that weakened the Volk. Most disturbing was the spread of a dehumanizing utilitarian discourse that treated human life in terms of materials and cost-benefit analysis. The logic of euthanasia found a growing audience, as in the book by the lawyer Carl Binding and the psychiatrist Alfred Hoche, which in 1920 called for permission for the destruction of worthless life. Psychology has the wildest history. Psychology, psychiatry, they have the wildest history, don't they? Anyway, basically what they're saying here, eugenics, race science led to many people coming up with these crazy ideas that the state was basically the leader of the race, and the race was essential to a person's identity, and the race had the right to eliminate lower forms of life within the race and also outside if they chose to live under the racial dictatorship of the state. So, continuing here. During the Great Depression of 1929, which paved the way for the collapse of the Weimar Republic, the crisis shattered the economic base of a costly welfare state and provided further impetus for euthanasia programs that would save the exchequer the high cost of maintaining thousands of insane, mentally feeble, and racial degenerates in asylums and hospitals. However, while Weimar doctors did engage in some sterilization, in general, the potential dangers of state racism and legalized murder were kept in check by a republic that remained true to the protection of individual rights. German eugenics was no more totalitarian than the sterilization programs that were legalized in the United States, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and elsewhere during the interwar period. So while Germany was going full-on fascist, there were many parts of the world that were doing proto-fascism or fascism light. Okay? The Nazi seizure of power in January 1933 led to the immediate implementation of race hygiene legislation that introduced a vast program of measures to eliminate the hereditary capacity of those designated as cretins, feeble-minded, criminals, homosexuals, gypsies, Jews, and mixed-race Negroes. On June 28, 1933, the Minister of the Interior established a committee of experts for population and racial policy, which included Nazi politicians like Himmler and Walther Darré, along with civil servants and academic experts like Professor Fritz Lenz. The Law for the Prevention of Hereditarily Diseased Progeny of July 14, 1933, the Law Against Dangerous Habitual Criminals of November 24, 1933, and other measures opened the way for the compulsory sterilization or castration of over 1/3 children and adults. Basically, people with autism, Down syndrome, birth defects, etc., that would prevent them from living a full life, blind people, the deaf, etc., were basically sterilized, castrated, etc. Later acts and decrees in particular, the Law for the Protection of German Blood and Honor, November 14th to 1935, facilitated the racial identification and registration of Jews and aliens and forbade intermarriage or sexual relations with Aryan Germans. I wonder what happened if somebody got married, like in 1934, to a Jewish person. Were those marriages annulled? Did the state, break them up? I wonder what happened. So anyway, the euthanasia program authorized by Hitler on October 1939 led to the secret killing of over 5,000 children, and the medical and technical experts in charge of the gassing were later deployed to find means to the final solution. The program for the total elimination of Jews and other groups presented a major bureaucratic, technical, and medical problem that could only be resolved through the collaboration of many thousands of professionals, large teams of anthropologists, biologists, hygienicists, economists, geographers, and statisticians. Such experts were crucial to the legal construction of race, who was or was not a Jew, to the complex card index system used to identify Jews, to the hereditary health courts which adjudicated on sterilization, and to the overall intervention, coordination, and running of a mass killing apparatus. The pragmatics of racial genocide was thus very much a responsibility, not only of fanatical Nazi leaders, but also of professional elites. There is an intense ongoing debate about how it was possible for apparently civilized and highly educated people, lovers of Beethoven or Goethe. Okay. Is it Goth or Goethe or Goat? Is he the goat? To engage in such horrific acts. On a material level, the immense proliferation of professional posts, the establishment and extensive funding of race laboratories, research institutes, health courts, and the overall structures of the racial state provided a rich opportunity for academics, lawyers, civil servants, and doctors to promote their careers and to achieve upward social mobility, high status, and considerable wealth. Basically, what they're saying is like, how could these people go along with the Nazis? Well, basically, the Nazis had the money, the guns, and the power, so people are going to go where that is. It doesn't matter what organization it is. It could be the communists in charge or the fascists in charge. There are some people that are just careerists. There are some people that are just social climbers. There are some people that just want to be on the winning side. So they're just going to go up the top and say they agree with whatever, right? So those race scientists who were willing to engage with the Nazi agenda found opportunities for rapid promotion, while the lukewarm or resistant sank into obscurity. Such individuals, many of whom were apolitical and not fanatical in their anti-Semitism, had undoubtedly had their moral sensibility corrupted and blunted by a technocratic and scientific rationale which claimed that policy should be dictated by the unsentimental laws of nature, and which at the same time both depersonalized the victims and masked the brutal reality of murder through a veiled language. In the thesis of Zygmunt Bauman and others, genocide was a distinctive feature of modernity. For example, the extensive division of labor typical of capitalist society, a specialization of function that was reproduced in the killing apparatus of Nazi Germany, meant that a white-coated technician or researcher working in a laboratory dedicated to the physical properties of chemical gases could be quite distant from the moral implications and dreadful reality of the end use of Zyklon B. The process of desensitization and the clinical or pathological dissociation between feelings or conscious and the reality of murder was shown by the work of the medical assessors who, without ever seeing the patient, marked forms for disabled children with a plus or a minus according to whether they were to die or not. That's cold, man. That's cold. That sent shivers down my spine. One assessor, Dr. Joseph Schreck, was proud to have shown his dedication to efficient work by processing 15,000 forms very conscientiously in 9 months. Wow. I wonder who his descendants are. Do they know that's what Grandpa did? Grandpa processed the files of children. She lives, he dies. Oh, that's a Jewish baby, kill him. That's horrible. Anyway, anti-Semitic repression in the German public. The medical/biological level of the Nazi racist program represents one small part of the governmental apparatus that persecuted the Jews, but it is typical of the way in which racist practice was implemented by elites working within the state apparatus. It remains to be seen how far such policies were made possible through the support of the general population. The intention here is not to examine the contested issue of how far the public was aware of the existence of the concentration camps. Clearly, such knowledge was quite extensive, but it has little to tell us about anti-Semitism. Far from revealing Far more revealing are the popular reactions to the much more visible manifestations of anti-Semitism between 1933 and 1939, prior to the final solution, such as Nazi racial propaganda, stormtrooper, SA, street-level violence, particularly the pogrom of November 1938, and discriminatory legislation. Fortunately, there exists in the security reports of the Nazi government, as well as in the intelligence reports by agents of the Socialist Party in exile, an extensive body of evidence on the mood of public opinion. Such material provides an excellent opportunity to explore the limits to the impact of racist propaganda, even under a dictatorial regime that could impose its will with the most extreme forms of violence. Firstly, regional surveys of Nazi Party mobilization show enormous variations in the extent to which anti-Semitism was a significant local issue. In some areas, anti-Semitic Gauleiters could impose their ideas on local Nazi activists. What is a Gauleiter? I have to look this up, man, because this is the second time I've seen this word. Gauleiter. All right, a political official governing a district under Nazi rule, or as known now, an overbearing official. I'll put this in the chat. So a Gauleiter is an overbearing official. All right, hopefully y'all see it in the chat. Hold on. Maybe I can't send it. Okay, hold on, wait. Hold on, sorry for the pause. I know people maybe are listening. Okay. All right, Gauleiter, noun, historical, a political official governing a district under Nazi rule, like a Nazi governor of a region, right? Or an overbearing official as it's used now today. So, in some areas, anti-Semitic Gauleiters could impose their ideas on local Nazi activists, as in Franconia and parts of Hesse, while other leaders were indifferent. In many rural areas, attempts to remove Jews as cattle dealers and middlemen met with resistance because they were seen to play an important economic function, and the Gestapo bemoaned the attitude of the peasants in which any sort of racial consciousness was missing. The most powerful core of opposition to National Socialism came from the two working class parties, the Social Democratic Party, SPD, and the Communist Party, KPD, along with the trade unions. However, within 6 months of seizing power, the Nazi regime had not only banned all three, but also crushed the social base of the workers' movement in the housing estates, clubs, and neighborhood associations of the major cities. The growing reign of terror, the deployment of well-armed SA thugs, the mass incarceration of socialists and communists in concentration camps, and new legislation that made it a serious offense to marry, aid, or even publicly sympathize with Jews meant that acts of resistance required a considerable degree of courage. The impact of the totalitarian system was to destroy the organizational basis of protest apart from the Catholic and Protestant churches, and to drive individuals back into private and isolated worlds. The overall position was well summed up by a Gestapo report from Münster. The true mood of the population is reflected in the passivity of great parts of the public towards the Nazi movement's activities. Only because of fear of reprisals has this attitude remained submerged. Basically, people were operating out of fear after the Nazis crushed all opposition. So, in the summer of 1935, Nazi Party activists engaged in a wave of violent actions against the Jews, but secret reports showed that this alienated the public rather than winning approval. Many people ignored the boycott of Jewish shops and services, even though it meant defying intimidation by thugs. On the nights of November 9th and 10th, 1938, the Nazis coordinated a national pogrom of extreme violence, the so-called Kristallnacht, during which mobs smashed up or burned over 7,500 Jewish shops and houses and 276 synagogues, and murdered 91 Jews. This was the one occasion during the Third Reich when the German public was directly and overtly confronted on a national scale with the full savagery of anti-Jewish violence. You know what's crazy? On YouTube, I forgot, I got this channel in my recommendations a few months ago. There's this young boy. It sounds like a young boy. He doesn't show his face. Who knows? It might be AI slop from Russia or China. Who knows? But there's somebody that does like historical revisionism of the Nazi era, right? So like I remember watching this video where he explains the book burnings and basically says, well, the books were about transgender people and gay people and like pedophilia with children, right? So because the books were about that, don't they deserve to be burned, right? Right? That's essentially what he was trying to say. I have to find that channel again so I can watch how he's going to twist crystal knots because, you know, I find that very disturbing that somebody could, you know, make some excuses for the Nazi regime's brutality against people, right? And I would love how do you twist crystal knot to make it seem like a good thing that Jews were murdered, their synagogues burned? That's not good at all. But I'm pretty sure that YouTuber found a way to twist that and make it seem justified. Anyway. This was the one occasion during the Third Reich when the German public was directly and overtly confronted on a national scale with the full savagery of anti-Jewish violence. The overall response, far from one of support for this supposed expression of popular feeling, was one of shame and disgust at the barbaric, orchestrated violence of Nazi fanatics. One witness wrote, "No one to whom I spoke rejoiced in the shambles. On the contrary, those who were supposed to have been spontaneous about it stood around the newspaper kiosks registering puzzlement, perturbation, even disgust, or else they hurriedly passed the hastily boarded up windows on the Neuer wall with their gaze fixed firmly on their boots. Many people suspected that destruction of Jewish stores, far from being an expression of principled ideological racism, was part of a campaign to destroy business competition. The National Socialist leadership was sufficiently chastened by the adverse public response to ensure later moves towards genocide were concealed. The secrecy which surrounded both the euthanasia program as well as the final solution shows all too clearly that the Nazi leadership knew it could not rely on popular backing for its extermination policies. Basically saying that Germany was captured by these radical lunatics at the top, and most of the people were too afraid of, you know, being the victims themselves that they didn't say anything about it. Or people said, you know what, I'm just going to mind my own business. I don't care about it. You know, if it happens to them, at least it doesn't happen to me. You know, I'm just going to, you know, put my head in the sand, right? And unfortunately, this is the sentiment for a lot of people today. So continuing here. From this, it cannot be concluded that the German public was, in general, free from anti-Semitism. There was a deeply entrenched tradition of anti-Jewish prejudice that meant that the levels of resistance to the Nazi onslaught were weakened. Many Germans were not particularly opposed to decent and proper forms of legal discrimination against Jews, those measures that had the sanction of the state, but rather hostile to the unpleasant and unruly forms of violence practiced by SA thugs. But the tolerance of the initial legislation that inexorably chipped away at Jewish rights eventually opened the way to more insidious and murderous forms of repression. In general, the kind of anti-Semitism which was prevalent among the public was far removed from the ideological and exterminationist forms that were current among a small minority of Nazi leaders and activists. The government supported a vast propaganda apparatus to impose its racial Weltanschauung upon the national community, from cinema films and radio to school textbooks and exhibitions, but much of this had a limited impact. A Nazi Party report commented, "There is not a place without a Sturmer showcase or other posters. Every child learns about the Jewish menace. Anti-Semitic propaganda is delivered in lectures everywhere. At every meeting, the party raises the Jewish question, and despite all this, the campaigns have not the slightest success." One of the reasons for this was that even the most totalitarian of states could erase profoundly entrenched traditions and value systems, like that of the Catholic South and West of Germany, in which Jews were still fundamentally viewed as fellow human beings. What the history of Nazi Germany confirms is a general feature of all forms of modern racism. The ideological elaboration of racism and its practical implementation through political programs and government acts had been primarily the work of the middle class of educated elites. The impetus of racism has in general been a top-down phenomenon in European societies rather than a consequence of popular initiatives and pressures from below. In particular, the detailed elaboration of racial legislation and decrees has invariably been the work of experts operating within the state apparatus, particularly within ministries of the central government, with considerable degrees of autonomy from public opinion. Once again, state captured by radical lunatics, social climbers, and careerists who basically don't care that they're hurting their fellow human beings, unfortunately. All right, so anti-Semitism in Poland, let's go here. When we turn to anti-Semitism in the rest of Europe during this period, 1914 to 1945, quite clearly the most dramatic shifts came with the Nazi conquest of Europe and the attempt to extend the final solution to the whole continent. The degree of collaboration with or resistance to Nazi Germany by occupied or satellite regimes, some 23 states in all, has been taken as a comparative measure of the depth of anti-Semitism across continental Europe. Space does not allow an examination of all these countries, but the situation is analyzed next in relation to Poland, Italy, France, and Hungary, which provide a representative overview. The situation in Poland was in many ways quite typical of many nations in Central and Eastern Europe, from Romania and Bulgaria to the Baltic states, in which anti-Semitism served as the cement for xenophobic right-wing movements of a conservative, Christian, and traditionalist kind. This authoritarian and extremely nationalist politics, located within traditional and predominantly agrarian or peasant economies, had little in common with fascism or with modern forms of scientific racism. Many of the new interwar states of Central Europe faced the difficult task of nation building after a long period of dependency on or partition by the Russian and Habsburg empires. All dreamed of establishing a coherent and unified order through ethnic homogeneity, but found their drive towards an integral nationalism frustrated by the presence of large minority groups. This was particularly true of Poland, where, in addition to a Jewish population of 3 million, 10% of the total, there were German, Ukrainian, and Belarusian minorities. At the end of the First World War, the newly independent Polish government, against its wishes, was compelled to sign the Minorities Treaty on June 28, 1919, which gave full rights to racial, religious, or linguistic minorities and full equality and state protection for Jews was ensconced in the 1921 Constitution. Many Poles felt resentment that such guarantees had been imposed on the new sovereign state by external, cosmopolitan Jewish forces. Such feelings were especially strong in the National Democratic Party, or the NDEX, founded in 1897, which under its leader, Dmowski, 1864 to 1939, engaged in political anti-Semitism that attempted to find a massed electoral base through whipping up hostility to the Jews. The Polish Jews, as elsewhere in Central Europe, held a leading position in commerce, industry, and the university-trained professions, and this fueled economic anti-Semitism among the conservative middle classes, who were keen to remove them as competitors. But above all, the NDEX thrived on a quasi-racist and exclusionary form of nationalism, which refused to accept the Jews could become part of a Polish nation that was defined in Volkish terms as an organic community founded on Catholicism, language, culture, and an essential identity of spirit. Unlike the situation in Western Europe, Poland not only had a very large Jewish population, 1/5 of the world's total, but the majority were Orthodox, were quite distinctive in dress, culture, and language, 87% Yiddish or Hebrew speaking, and clearly identifiable as a community which was separate from the Poles, for whom national identity was defined by Catholicism. Dmowski maintained that even assimilated or converted Jews could never become true members of the Polish nation, and that if such integration was attempted, it would radically undermine and even destroy the nation from within. Armed with a virulent and exclusionary nationalism, the NDEX organized a large-scale boycott against Jewish business in 1912, and in the interwar years pushed for legislation which would severely restrict the political and economic rights of Jews and ultimately force their physical expulsion from the nation. So from what I'm reading here, I didn't know about any of this history. Basically, Poland was on the losing end of World War I, and they were forced to basically accept the terms and conditions that all the people in their, kingdom, their nation, had to be treated equally. So the Jews were given full rights, right? And so the people on the right, the proto-fascists of Poland, basically were very upset that the Jews were sort of forced on them, right? Even though they had been living amongst them for years, the Jews there were different than Western Jews. They were Yiddish, and they were more, distinctive. They were more orthodox, with the curly locks and the all black and the hats and stuff like that. And so they didn't like having to be forced to accept people. Similar to how after Reconstruction in the South, the whites who were disenfranchised after the Confederates lost the Civil War, they were pissed off that black men got to vote and they didn't get to vote. So stuff like that, right? That's how I'm understanding it here. So, although the index were fully aware of the virulent forms of scientific racism that were spreading in interwar Germany, on the whole, they appear to have avoided formulating their own anti-Semitism in biological terms. The index were profoundly anti-German and concerned to block the historic drive of the Germans towards the east, and this may explain why Domowski established much closer links with fascist Italy, which he admired as a model of the authoritarian anti-Bolshevik state. However, much more significant than this restriction on Nazi influence was the difficulty faced by a profoundly Catholic movement in formulating a biological and radical anti-Semitism, while not breaching the official and doctrinal condemnation of scientific racism by the Church. The central role of Catholicism in Polish integral nationalism explains why, unlike in secularized Western Europe, racism was not elaborated in a modern biological form, but rather in terms of a much older tradition of anti-Semitism in which Jews were accused of ritual murder or being the collective killers of Christ. Cardinal Holland, the primate of Poland, that's a funny name. The primates of Poland. That's hilarious. There better not be a Moroccan/Nigerian rapper in Poland going by the primates of Poland. Don't ever do that. But that's a hilarious name. The primates of Poland, in a pastoral letter that was read from the pulpits in parish churches, proclaimed, "It is a fact that the Jews fight against the Catholic Church. They are free thinkers and constitute the vanguard of atheism, of the Bolshevik movement, and of revolutionary activity. Their publishers spread pornographic literature. It is true that the Jews are committing frauds, practicing usury, and dealing in white slavery." However, Holland went on to qualify his vicious circular by warning against the fundamental unconditional anti-Jewish principle imported from Nazi Germany, since it was against Catholic ethics and not permissible to hate anyone, not even Jews. That's a wild sentence. All right, the leading anti-Semitic ideologue, Boguslaw Mindzinski, who in 1938 called for the forced immigration of all Jews, made use of a biological language. The Jew is a foreign body, dispersed in our organism, so that it produces a pathological deformation, requiring removal of the alien body. However, he went on to reject racism and to support positive nationalism and the position that the distinctiveness of a nation's culture is an immeasurably high value that must be defended and developed. Interwar Poland demonstrates how the far right, within the nation and undergoing a profound crisis of modernization, expressed anti-Semitism in archaic forms, rather than through an elaborate anthropological or biological racism. However, through making cultural difference and group boundaries absolutely impermeable, such formulations of cultural racism could serve as an identical function of exclusion and give rise to similar levels of repression and violence. There has been much debate as to whether Poland, the location of so many of the Nazi camps and mass killings, was taking an independent path towards genocide during the interwar period. During the hardship of the Depression and after the death of the dictator Pilsudski in 1935, who had provided a bulwark against the fascist right, anti-Semitism assumed a much more extreme and violent form. During 1935 to 1936, some 1,289 Jews were wounded in attacks in over 150 locations. Nazi racism began to find a more receptive audience, and in 1934, Goebbels lectured on the Jewish question at Warsaw University. The index formally broke with the anti-racist policy of the Catholic Church, and the ruling Sancha began to resort to anti-Semitism to retain its base of political support. However, this dangerous drift towards violence was restrained by a number of factors. The Polish government, right down to the outbreak of war with Germany, never broke with the liberal constitution of 1921, nor implemented a single piece of anti-Semitic legislation, while various fascist organizations were banned in 1933. Secondly, the main class base of the index and of ultranationalism was found among a small and fragile middle class, spearheaded by militant students who felt inferior alongside the superior commercial and professional skills of the Jews. However, as in Germany, racial anti-Semitism found little support among either the peasantry or the working class that fell under communist or socialist leadership. It is not at all certain that had Poland retained its independence and avoided conquest by Nazi Germany, it would ever have implemented a genocidal program, although there can be little doubt that the widespread diffusion of traditional anti-Semitism in Polish society did prepare the way for public indifference towards repression of the Jews and for a minority to become actively involved in collaboration and mass murder. So very interesting stuff here. Basically what I'm gathering from this is that Poland, had a lot of anti-Semitism, but it wasn't the scientific, eugenic, racism that the Nazis established, saying that the Jews had an essentially evil core to them. It was more based on, the Jews killed Jesus, right? And the Catholic Church, the Catholic Turks, that's funny. The Catholic Church told the Polish right, hey, no, you can't hate Jews. But later they got more influenced by the Nazis that were coming there. Goebbels went there and, told the right wing, hey, the Jew is bad because of his blood and stuff like that. And so, as we know famously, Germany invaded Poland during World War II and basically had Poland under its control. And that's where we have Auschwitz and many other concentration camps. So, MacMaster is saying here it's not for certain that the Polish would have done that had they not been invaded by the Nazis, or if some other alternate timeline happened where the Nazis, didn't go on their mass, campaign across Europe. But it's still, it's still up in the air. We will never know. We do know for a fact that 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust, and that did not need to happen. And a lot of them died in Poland, in Austria, and in other places, right? But yeah, basically that's what he's trying to say about Poland. They had a different type of anti-Semitism, but it still led to violence and murder. This will be the last section we're going to read today, Anti-Semitism in Fascist Italy. So if you have any comments or questions, anything you put in the chat, we will get to it. So last section right here. Anti-Semitism in Fascist Italy. Italy under Mussolini, 1922 to 1943, one of the most advanced industrial nations in Western Europe, provides an interesting contrast with both Poland and Hitler's Germany, since it would indicate that an authoritarian fascist nationalism that emphasized corporate unity in opposition to Marxism and class conflict was not necessarily built upon anti-Semitic racism. The Italian Jews constituted not only a minute percentage of the total population, 0.1%, but were highly integrated such that in 1938, 43.7% of Jews were married to Gentiles and also held numerous positions within the fascist party. Anti-Jewish sentiment was so insignificant within Italian society that the opportunist Mussolini appears to have seen no political gain from espousing it during the period of 1922 to 1936. Mussolini, the elder statesman of fascism until 1933, disliked the extreme ideological forms of racism that emerged on the German right, objected to the rise of Nazi violence, and denounced scientific racism as untenable and unacceptable within the Italian context. A first significant shift towards state racism took place in 1936 and 1938. However, within the context of the Abyssinian War, and arose mainly from colonial racism and imperial hostility to miscegenation with black Africans. So basically what he's trying to say here is that the fascists in Italy didn't become super anti-Semites, but boy, did they hate Negroes. Boy, did the Italians hate Negroes. All right, in a key document, the Manifesto of the Race, July 1938, Mussolini defined all races in purely biological terms, classified the Jews as separate from the Italian Aryans, and unassimilable, and banned intermarriage. So Mussolini banned marriage between Jews and Italians, when the Italians were basically fucking everything. They were fucking everything, right? Jews, at least half of the Jews in Italy were married to non-Jews. Continuing. It would appear that this shift in policy came about not because Mussolini was giving way to pressure from Nazi Germany, Hitler withheld from interference in Italian domestic politics, but as a sign of solidarity with his powerful ally. Sir Andrew Cadogan, in a memorandum on January 1939, remarked on the shallow roots of Italian racism. In spite of anti-Semitic policy and legislation, anti-Semitism outside of a restricted government circle is non-existent. In spite of Jewish interment from June 1940, the conditions in the camps were relatively comfortable, and the fascists opposed the geographic extension of the final solution and intervened against the massacre of Jews in Croatia and Greece in November 1942, Italy. After it had occupied 8 French departments east of the Rhone, banned the wearing of the yellow star imposed by the Vichy regime, stopped all deportations to the concentration camps, and created a temporary haven for Jews escaping from Western France. It was only after the Germans had occupied Italy in 1943 that they were able to accelerate the brutal roundup of Jews and extend the final solution. Okay. Very interesting history. It reminds me of when I went to Albania and how the Albanians resisted the fascist Nazis who came there by hiding the Jews in a city called Berat. And it sounds like the Italians went back and forth. Like Mussolini was a careerist, he was a social climber, so if Hitler told Mussolini to hate the Jews, Mussolini said, "How much should I hate the Jews? Mamma mia, pizzeria." That was very bad Italian, but you get the idea. So yeah, basically the Italians, they're top down. Mussolini, did light anti-Semitism, but it was mostly against black people. He mostly hated black folks because the Italians were invading Abyssinia, aka Ethiopia, and getting their ass whipped. So, the Italians wrote all sorts of nasty things about black folks. And the Italians tried to help the Jews at some times, even though they did put them in concentration camps. But they didn't kill them. They fed them pizza. They fed them, all sorts of nice Italian food until the Germans came and, started doing Holocausting. Okay. Anyway, we're going to continue here. Anti-Semitism in France. This has been a very interesting read. Really like this book. Love this book. Very powerful stuff. We're going to be reading Mein Kampf, man, because Hitler's got to reply. Hitler's getting roasted all throughout this book. We're going to be reading Mein Kampf. We got to do that one day. But anyway, before we wrap this up, I just got to say, subscribe to Backpack Bandits, the travel channel I share with my wife. Subscribe to Culturalist Theory and watch all the videos that I make for them where I write list ranking artist catalogs. We have a very big list coming soon. It's a major list. It's one that's been waiting to be done for years by now, and it's dropping real soon, so y'all be on the lookout for that. And continue subscribing to this channel and supporting here, and turn on notifications. And if you have any comments under Book React, it will be read live on stream from me. So put that out there. Y'all be easy out there, and peace.